All right. In today's episode of PM Playbooks, we sit down with Vikas Gupta, Chief Product Officer at Evernest, a company managing over 20,000 properties across the United States. Vikas sits at the intersection of like traditional property management, cutting edge AI development, and seasoned product leadership. I want to explore in this episode how he's diving into transformation at an organizational level through kind of experimental AI strategies, navigating the shift from tools to autonomous agents and building workflows that make humans more efficient and generally just kind of making the business run smoother. So we're going to talk a little bit about his journey from McKinsey to prop tech founder to CPO. So Vikas, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You really have a cool background. You know, I got to know you at your last stop better than the one that you're at right now. Maybe give us kind of a trajectory of that journey, because obviously you've seen a lot of aspects of the industry having gone through these three different hops. Maybe tell us about just the latest one, transitioning from a prop tech leader into Evernest.
Yeah. So before Evernest, I was the CEO of Azebo, and Azebo was providing property management software to small self-managing landlords. So easiest way to describe it is AppFolio for self-managing landlords that are too small to use AppFolio. We were going through a process to sell the business. I got introduced to Matthew at Evernest and got to know him and the team. And from the first conversation with Matthew, it was apparent that both of us thought about the future of the business like in an eerily similar way. We were just coming at it from opposite ends. And so, Evernest, we do full service property management. Azebo was the opposite end of that, which was software for self-managing landlords. But what I had always thought at Azebo was that as more and more sort of physical services are enabled to be delivered digitally or through digital marketplaces and intermediaries enabled on a transactional basis, the option in the future is not going to be full service or full self-manage. It's going to be a spectrum where some people want full service property management. Some people want to outsource the leasing but handle the maintenance themselves. Some people want to outsource the maintenance but handle the leasing themselves. Some people want to opt in or out depending on, I own a home next to my home, so I can manage that, but I have a couple of doors, few neighborhoods away, and sometimes I want someone to lease that. And it's a whole spectrum there. And at Azebo, our vision was always, we're starting from the software side, full self-management, and then we're going to layer in on a transactional basis. And we had just started doing this. We launched a partnership with Lateral to enable maintenance, and we were looking for partners on the leasing side. So that's how we were building. And when I talked to Matthew, like unprompted, he sort of told me his vision for the business, which was start from full service and then offer some of that service delivery over time in components, and then maybe get all the way to where we were. So that was like, and that's a long-term vision. Evernest is a very large, very successful single-family home property manager. There's a lot to do. It's a lot of homes to manage on a full-service basis. But vision is vision. And that really excited me. So after I sold Azebo and I was looking for something new to do, I really liked Matthew. I liked the team they were building for. And then this was like pre like Q4 2025 AI hype, but AI was a big thing in even Q1, Q2 2025. And I was thinking about, all right, when I run a business, there's a lot of stuff I have to do. And even at that time, I was like, I wish I could be spending more time playing with AI, but I got all this other stuff to do as CEO. Maybe there's a role for me to like just go play with technology. And so when we talked about this chief product officer role, I was like, I can just go play with technology, which sounded super really fun. Yeah. And I had this thesis at the time, which I still think is generally correct, although I have less conviction in it now than I had a year ago, but I still believe it's the right answer, that given how nascent AI is, the opportunity to transform a business with AI is easier done from inside of the business than building products and services from outside of the business and trying to sell it in. Because you just have to be so intimately familiar with how that business works and its workflows to build such tailored solutions for them with AI that I thought that like outside in technology would take years to develop. And I still generally think that's correct, although it's obviously not a black and white thing. And even at Evernest, we're making build versus buy decisions on AI tools, and some of our earliest successes with operationalizing AI have actually been through third parties.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned something that a lot of our listeners would be really interested in, which is you come from this background where you were dealing with do-it-yourself landlords with the software that you were selling. That terrifies a lot of, the third-party management crowd that tailors their offering for that crowd, because I think top of mind for that audience right now is like, hey, will AI make it so easy to do property management in the future that a DIY landlord will not need a third party property manager? I'm just curious, what's your opinion on that? Because you've spent enough time with that audience to understand kind of where their motivations are and what technology they're willing to use and not willing to use. What's your opinion of the trajectory of AI and how it'll affect third party managers in the future for smaller assets where, a DIY landlord could manage it?
I think it just puts more pressure on third party property managers to deliver services that are harder to do with AI. And so if a property manager thinks as their role as we're a information intermediary, then that can easily get digitized out. So if it's just, hey, we're going to coordinate messaging and communication between the resident or the applicant and the owner, and we're going to coordinate, remote viewings, and we're going to collect rent and disperse rent, and then we'll just coordinate between a network of vendors, like all of that coordination, like that can be done by AI. And it'll take some time to get there, but it'll get there. But if you think about your job as a property manager, there's a level of expertise. There's a set of relationships. There's some economies of scale. There's some risk mitigation I can offer, which all, by the way, like all of those things point to size. So if you have the size to offer your own maintenance at a better cost, that's a real value. If you have the size where you're working with third-party vendors, and because you're such a big part of their business, they're giving you a deal that someone who's only going to use them once a year is not going to get, that's better value. If you're such a big size that you can offer insurance or quasi-insurance like products to spread risk around, because someone who has one home doesn't necessarily, the risk of having a bad tenant is, the downside for them is quite high. But if across 10,000, 15,000 homes, hey, if we place a tenant, sure, not all of them are going to be good because you can't be perfect, but our eviction rate is sub 50 basis points. You can package that up as an insurance product and sell that peace of mind in a way that if you just have one home and AI, you can't do that unless someone else is manufacturing that insurance product and aggregating that across thousands of homes outside of the PM network. So there's all these things that we can do that are value add to our clients that aren't just information coordination. But if all you're doing is information coordination, yeah, you should be scared.
I love how you position that. I think what you're alluding to is that, like, hey, listen, if you're going to not add any incremental value to a pretty well-known playbook for how things are handled, then yeah, AI could replace you. But you're also talking a little bit about how leveraging AI strategies is one thing, but leveraging them at scale and packaging those up as repeatable and kind of based on multiple data points, it becomes even more powerful. Because I do think that that's also, you see people vibe coding things and you're like, okay, like you built a signature platform for just you, but once you sign 10,000 of these documents, all the faults will fall out, and kind of you
Mm-hmm.
determine why it needs to be enterprise scale. You recently, I know when you came into the business, we kind of had some show notes on you, how you ran a 2-hour hands-on Claude session for Evernest executive leadership. And instead of showing up and pulling out a PowerPoint presentation, you decided to take a very different approach, which was to like get people kind of into AI right away. And I wanted to put this out there because I know like Matthew, who's not a coder, was saying some stuff on LinkedIn about how the world really should be on notice, because if he can build an app, anyone can do this, and it's become more approachable. Tell me like the rationale of like, seems like Evernest is moving really fast now and just experimenting with AI, but what was your rationale to get people going? Because I think a lot of people just don't know where to get started. How did you get Evernest to get going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of there's historically been a gulf between technologists and non-technologists, where technologists will say a lot of things and it all just sounds the same to non-technologists. And so even in a pre-AI world, we'd be saying things like yeah, like we can help with transaction reconciliation, and like we can analyze invoices, and we can do all these things. And that doesn't really like sound very different from some of the things people are saying with AI. And so it all kind of just sounds like mumbo jumbo of like, you've been saying these things forever. Like, when am I going to see the product? And what's changed is that there's a level of judgment, there's a level of decision making, and there's a level of speed of execution that you can do with AI that you couldn't have done easily before. But how do you communicate that to someone unless they actually feel it? And so for me, what I've learned in trying to teach people and unlock their minds around AI, and this isn't just Evernest, I've done a version of this for a few other groups of folks, it's like, what is that aha moment? Like, what is the moment for them that replicates the moment of experience that I had? And for me, it was coding, but that's because I'm used to what it used to be. And now, the first time, like a year and a half ago, when I went into V0 and I said, make me this thing, and it made this thing, I was like, oh my God,
Like,
this is going
what
to
just
change the world.
happened?
Yeah, what
Yeah.
just happened? And then for them, the real aha moment was, what we did is we had them all install Cowork, connect their Gmails to Cowork, and then just told it, like, read the last 50 emails I sent and develop a voice guide for how I write email. And then it does its thing, and they're all like, this sounds like me. And that aha moment of like,
Right.
it's that easy. It's
Right.
that easy. And
Right.
AI can write my email and sound like me. And
Right.
it's really about that wow aha moment. And then they go all in. And that was the key. It wasn't to like put out a roadmap or
No.
talk in the abstract. It was, I need to unlock their minds so that everything I'm saying like is grounded in an experience that they had. Then we can have like a much more informed conversation about what this means for our business.
What's really cool about that story is how you and I will probably describe it as like, we've both, and currently I'm still leading a technology company. So like the unlock of seeing something coded so quickly, or showing somebody how they can do something faster. Like for us, it's like, let's go. But then for someone else, they could be looking at that and be like terrified, because they're like, this thing now has access to all my emails. It can maybe start sending emails I don't want it to send. So there's like the opposite effect too, where people see that and they get terrified. Did you get any of those responses too in that room, or was it just all let's go all the way in with AI?
I think it was less about some of those more in the sort of granular concerns. I think there was definitely a let's go all in on AI. And I wouldn't say it was terrified. It was more about making acute the speed and what that means for how businesses need to change. So the pace of change, the pace of the quality improvements in AI, the what it can do today relative to 6 months ago or even 12 months ago. Um, and then I think the less terrifying, but more of the um, sort of galvanization or catalytic reaction of like, oh, like I need to think about this as not a 2-year thing or a 3-year thing, but as a this could transform the world and will transform the world in 6 or 9 months.
Yeah, and I think you hit like a little bit of the nerve on the fluency of AI. So people like not even knowing what it's capable of, and then all of a sudden, like some people think of AI as like an assistant that they can talk to and it gives them answers. But what you just described was something more agentic. It was able to like actually like go learn something about how you behave and then go do something. How do you feel like companies should think about kind of navigating the fluency gap? Because what you did got a lot of people to understand it together, and it takes a whole organization to kind of like embrace and move. How do you close those fluency gaps when you're talking about like teams that will be all over the place in terms of their understanding of AI?
Yeah, I think I think everyone should have this fluency, but I also don't think everyone needs to, right? And so the way we are handling it at Evernest, and I'm not at all going to say that we're the best in class or we've got it nailed, but this is what we're doing today, and I would love to hear what you're doing. Is we sort of have multiple tracks, and so we have our product and engineering team, and we're working on building agentic capabilities and AI enabled workflows that need to be deployed reliably, consistently across a wide surface area of the company. So within a specific workflow or within a specific function, it is being productized in a way where it is going to become a core part of that operation. That is a fairly high bar, and we're trying to do it thoughtfully and deliberately. And so that's why it's sitting in the product engineering team. At the sort of opposite end of the spectrum is we are trying to empower people through Claude and through Gemini to build their own sort of gems or mini agents or skills or little workflows that help them in their day to day. And that doesn't need to be production grade software. That doesn't need to be fully corner cased out. That just is, hey, you do this thing that takes you 30 minutes a day, or 45 minutes a day, or 2 hours a week. And can you go engineer it out? And that is very much like, we're going to give you access to the tools. We have a weekly office hours. We have a Slack channel where we trade tips, and like go invent, like go and help invent like how to make your life or your team's life better. And then there's sort of the intersection of the two, which is the things that most excite me, which is when someone from the team, for example, on our institutional team, one of our asset managers is like, hey, I just built this interactive reporting dashboard as a prototype. Can we build this into the product? And we're like, this is great. Like this, just like you've built it. It works well enough to where you've proven the value, which is always the thing that as an engineer or a product person, you're like, is the thing I'm going to build be used? So if you've already got like a valid prototype and we need to go execute, like we can iron out all the rough edges and integrate it into the workflow. Like because that's like accelerating innovation across the board. When the team is empowered to sort of proof of concept prototype, they're living it and they're like, hey, can you go integrate this back? So that's sort of the way we're thinking about it here. But I'd love to know like what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, very similar. I mean, we have obviously the defined roadmap of where we want to infuse AI. When if you go back to your software days, you see so many of these repeatable workflows, and what I think we've been really focusing more and more on is, I think we're in a place where humans do want to be in the loop more and more. Even though you can do a lot of agentic things, whole hog and not have a human there, I don't think we've built a really good learning loop for AI to consistently improve itself. There's great tools out there that are trying to do this, but even if, I don't think people are comfortable just running their business on agents making decisions. So I think the human in the loop with AI conversation is something that's more technical, that involves like product thinkers to look at, like, we've got 30 plus years of experience building software in this industry. So we're like, okay, this is how we did it for a long time. This is how AI could take it 80% of the way there. And then the human gets involved and it can be fantastic. So there's definitely that track. I really resonated with your story about giving people a set of tools and letting them play with them. and they become kind of your lab for coming up with potential other things that should be on that roadmap. I find that there's kind of two categories in there that we keep finding, which are things that obviously make you run operationally better to cut costs that, maybe like, hey, like we used to use this product and we don't really need it anymore because I'm only using 10% of it, and I can put that into a place where I get exactly what I want. It's so fantastic. You mentioned co-work. One of the things that kind of is newer for us is like using co-work and having people do those things on their computer locally makes it really hard to graduate it up to the enterprise story. So we try to encourage people to kind of build in places where it can be shared. And I think that's one of the interesting parts about giving people the tools. Like, give them the tool, let them explore. But if they find something that works great, also make it easy for us to bring it into like the product roadmap. So we've made some different decisions on where we want to encourage people to do things so that it's easier for us to graduate it, and also that we can have some oversight on it as a company. I'll give you a real concrete one. Like in our interactions with customers, like it's very common for certain people to be really quiet, and then we just assume being quiet is happiness. But what we realize is being quiet also doesn't necessarily leave the customer in a place that they're maybe getting all the answers to the questions they want. So we started building the team started building tools to kind of pull through, like you said, inbox and look for signals that may have been overlooked, or places where they may be engaging with content but not maybe asking the right questions, and then surfacing those to the team to be smarter about like, hey, these are signals of things that I could do something about. Whether we want to graduate that to an agent, which then goes to the product team and says, make this into an agent. But just for the human, I think we live in a world where there's just so many places your attention can be divided, and giving them the ability, like you said, like you build your perfect dashboard for what your day should look like. And if we start to see patterns there that make sense, let's move it up. So right now, that's been mostly giving them tools like Replit or, Claude Code, and encouraging them not to use chat so much, or build it in like Claude Chat and make it an artifact, which you can share, which are cool features. I think these platforms are realizing more and more that this, vibe coding world is a social one. It used to be very like kind of insular or siloed, and you can get lost doing it for hours. I mean, you could burn like a whole week just doing it and just being super geeked out on it. But then all of a sudden you realize that there's a community that's doing it with you. And I think that's where the power comes in, is like sharing these best practices. So that's been our journey.
Yeah. Social one with people who aren't going to be using GitHub.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly. You also, there's a comment you made. You introduced this concept of like a 2x2 matrix, which I think is really fascinating. You mentioned it's like, who am I building it for? And, with humans and agents kind of on the two axes. Do you want to kind of break that down for us? Because I think one thing I think that's your superpower is that I think you're a very big picture thinker, and you have a really great knack for like framing things up for people to understand them. And this one really resonated with me. Maybe tell us what the 2x2 matrix is.
Yeah. So a little bit of context first is I was thinking about our roadmap for 2026, and Matthew, even though he's not a technologist, I mean, he's his founder CEO, and he has that knack for asking the questions that only founder CEOs ask. And he sort of asked me like, hey, you're building all this software, but if the future is agents, how much of it do we actually need? And that got me thinking, and the framework that I put together is this 2x2. And so on one axis, and the 2x2 is sort of on both sides, it's humans and agents. And one axis is like, who are my users? And the other axis is, who are my customers? And up until, now, or 6 months ago, like everyone was in that upper left quadrant, right? Your users are humans and your customers are humans. And a lot of the conversation over the past 6, 9, 12 months, although it's starting to shift, has been about moving down the axis where like my users are agents, but still operating in the assumption like my customers are humans. But then what happens when your customers become agents? And what does that mean for the software you're building? And how much of it do you actually need at that point? Or is it different? And so, most of my thinking even today is still along that first axis, which is how much of the software that we're building today is for humans, how much is it for our agents, what does that mean for throwaway work versus not throwaway work. I think where we've ended up there is that there's a data foundation that's critical regardless of who's actually going to be consuming that information. So really nail that data foundation. And then if you have human consumers of that information, well, the good thing is that front end work is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so even if it is work that you're going to re-engineer in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, or even maybe even throw away because 95% of the consumer of that data is an agent in 9 months, that's fine because, Cloud Code or Codex or whatever your preferred coding solution is can just jam out front end that's good enough for our needs. And we don't have to worry about sort of that throwaway issue. But the piece that we're starting to think about and is really just a question, like I don't have a lot of answers on it, is like what happens when our human or our agent reaches out to someone and the person who answers that email or picks up the phone or whatever is another agent. And I heard a story from, there's a relatively new but pretty exciting company called Mason.ai in the maintenance space and property management. I was talking to Nitin there. He was telling me the story about how their dispatch agent called up a vendor. I think it was a plumber, and that plumber was using a scheduling agent. So you actually had the dispatch agent talking to the scheduling agent, and they were doing it on the phone. And he had this interesting comment, which is like, you have a computer talking to a computer, but you're taking the output of one computer, you're translating it into voice, you're transmitting it over a phone. Then the computer on the other side is taking that phone, transcribing the phone call, translating it to tokens and processing it. And really, like, they need to fall back to some sort of like API conversation.
Yeah, totally. I was going to say, what a waste.
Yeah.
Waste of money and effort.
Yeah, but they sort of figured that out. And it's interesting because it's like, on the one hand, they should fall back to an API conversation. But on the other hand, if you're on email or you're on phone, setting aside fraud or spoofing, there's a certain level of like authentication that you can assume. So like if Evernest, me personally, or my agent sends you, Sina, an email at your personal email address or your business email address, but it's your email address, and you answer or an agent answers, that could be obfuscated from us. But we're just going to assume that it was you or someone who has authority to act on your behalf under whatever sort of like guidelines we've established, things that you can agree to on email versus in some other form. If it falls back into some other like completely computer to computer relationship, there's a whole set of permissions, authority, capabilities, thinking that people who are much deeper into this are starting to figure out that I'm not, but that needs to get figured out because we can't necessarily assume at that point it's you. So there's like if we rely on sort of like human channels of communication and you've somewhat like obfuscated who is on each side,
right,
that solves some problems that you would run into if you sort of fell back into an API to API world.
Yeah, and I think for like the very non-technical user, we've talked about this on this show before, which is like, are we going to be designing websites for humans anymore? Or are we going to be designing, sites for agents who are harvesting information about our management services, our availability, our policies, etc.? There's another element of it is like, when a phone call comes into your office, are you even going to be talking to a human anymore in the future? Or are you going to be talking to either another company's agent? Or, I mean, I actually don't think it's that far away where, everybody, like every normal person, will have some kind of agent that'll carry out tasks for them. And it'll be calling to figure out if it can schedule a showing or if it can get a maintenance job done. And then all of a sudden you start to ask the question, which is like, holy cow, like, are we just taking really crappy human-centric software and putting, technology on top of it that is supposed to make it work with these agents? Or should we really rip this all apart and start over and think about, who we're really addressing our solutions to? We made a move here at Apply to completely re-engineer our full stack, like a completely different version of Apply that's designed for agents. It took a long time to build it, but it's designed to work with agents. And I've talked about like headless services a lot, and people are like, what is that? And I'm like, well, they're basically products you never log into, but they
Mm-hmm.
carry out a task for you and they do it really well. And your agents rely on them. Earlier in the show, you kind of made a comment like, I kind of feel like Evernest is moving to like the headless property management company where you can just call certain services from us and we do them really well. And if you want the full stack, we can do that. And I think this is the new world, right? Where, there's going to be people who move really slow and duct tape together ways for crappy human software to continue to survive. But then there's these next generation companies that are going to embrace that this paradigm is coming and they want to be the first mover there and make it really easy to work with their company, their software, because it's designed for this. I know you've got an opinion on this. Share.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of when, not if, and I'd rather be early than late. Um, and things are frankly moving a lot faster than I thought they would. So some of this stuff I wrote like 2 months ago, and I was looking back at what I wrote, and I'm like, gosh,
Didn't age well.
just 2 months ago. I mean, just in the past 2 weeks, I think Stripe released the Link CLI, so now agents can purchase things via Stripe Link on your behalf, linked to your Link profile. And then also, I think Mercury released like a banking CLI, which I think is phenomenal. I wish my banks would have a banking CLI, but like it's already happening. I mean, it sounds like you're ahead of the curve there. So that's definitely something we are thinking about and we need to solve for. But we're also serving a wide range, so it's not binary for us. Like we're going to need to be able to support the owner who wants to pick up the phone and talk to someone, and we're going to need to be able to support the person who doesn't ever want to pick up the phone and wants their agent to just communicate with us. And we're going to need to be able to support people across that entire spectrum.
So essentially the playbook then for Evernest is like, hey, we're going to root ourselves in this future, but we're also going to support the past and make sure that we gracefully move into kind of how things are going to do it in the future. But like for a typical property management company who's listening to this, like, whoa, this is so much. I can appreciate a lot of people I talk to feeling like they may not be equipped to compete. How fast do you think property management companies need to make this shift? And if they don't, what's the realistic nature of, what's going to happen in the future?
So I don't think it's one size fits all, which I know is not as clean for a soundbite, but I think if you're the sort of like prototypical 200, 300, 400 door property manager, it's a different problem to go solve than Evernest, because Evernest is we're 20,000 plus and looking to grow. And so we can't necessarily be as focused, but we also have the resources where we don't need to be. I think if you're a 300 door property manager, it's really honing in on like what is different about you and who are you serving. And I imagine there's probably an opportunity, if not today, then over the next 12 months, for someone to build a very interesting sort of 300 door, one person property management company that is only catering to super tech forward owners who don't want to talk to you in person. But there's also going to be this long tail of people who are not going to have personal agents or don't trust their personal agents or are going to want to interact with you. And if that's your bread and butter, then you focus there. But it's the undifferentiated, it's the I'm going to serve anyone, I'm going to serve any asset class, I'm going to serve everyone. That's been getting harder and harder anyways over the past 20 years, I think, for all businesses. And this is just going to exacerbate that.
I remember I famously gave you some advice at Azebo. I said, you can't service the bottom of the market and the top of the market at the same time. Mm-hmm. You will die. And I think that's the same advice you're giving here. It's like, you got to really hone in on who your ICP is, who's your, intended customer, and just be really good at it. You've also, I think, with your role as chief product officer at Evernest, you probably are looking at this really kind of fine line between building AI systems that, complete tasks entirely or that augment humans to do their job better. I guess my main question is like, property management, you're dealing with people's like one of their most valuable assets, a home, a second home that, they decided not to sell. Now they're renting. How do you design AI systems that handle these high stakes, you know, multi-stakeholder type of scenarios? Because some of these things, I mean, we've heard all about the fraud that happens in screening and whatnot. I think it's not as easy as just handling an email conversation. It's pretty complicated. How do you think about like where you draw the line of where AI can do things completely versus where the human has to be in the loop?
So we are full human in the loop first. Our, I would say, most autonomous AI enabled flow is top of funnel leasing, which is also, while very important, doesn't have a lot of the risk parameters that you just talked about because it is a prospect. It is a fairly understood set of questions. It's a fairly public set of information. Very rarely is someone at the top of funnel leasing asking questions that's not already public information that can be found on a listing or some other part of our website. But even that one, we rolled out full human in the loop first. Every single response was approved or modified by a person. And then as we got more and more confident, we hit and we measured what that edit or what that override rate was. And then when we got to a certain critical mass, we said, okay, this is better on average than what we could do. So let's turn it on. And now we're at something like 86% of SMS conversations are fully handled by the agent. And that we did in partnership with Haven.ai, which is a fantastic group of folks. The big project that we are internally working on is one that is much harder to outsource because it's all systems, all internal data, not as standardized as top of funnel leasing. And that is helping our property managers communicate better with owners. That is very much you need to have full context on everything that's happening. That is something AI is very good at. Let's pull all the information across all the systems, the full history of every conversation, of every text, of every phone call, of every work order, of everything that's ever happened, package that up in a way that is much easier for a person to understand than having to look at 20 different screens. And then empower them to act differently. And because that is such a wider surface area and a much more high stakes conversation, we are very much approaching that from how do we empower the property manager, the human, to be a superhuman, not how do we have an agent go do that work for them. Now, the data foundation for that is the same. The way we display that data is different. There is a class of interactions in there that over time we will likely feel more comfortable offloading to an agent that is likely in the very nuts and bolts information request type, as opposed to judgment. I don't think, certainly in the foreseeable future, that we're going to be handing off all of that to an agent. But can we make the responses better because someone's not forgetting something? Can we make it easier for our PMs to respond in a timely manner because it's a triage prioritized queue with all the information they need to answer up front? Can we propose wording? Can we audit the response to make sure that all of the questions, because I'm sure you've seen it, sometimes you might get 17 questions in an email. And did you answer all 17 of them? Well, like it might be 16 that you answered and you just forgot, because I do that too. But an AI can just review it and say, hey, like there was this one other question that you didn't. So all those things that just make it easier for people to do their jobs better and provide a better service for people. That's where we're sort of headed. And so that's sort of like the spectrum and way we think about things is it is very much to sort of the framing that you put on it. Like what's the risk? And the higher the risk, the more we are careful, but generally speaking, we start with human in the loop on everything. And then from a build versus buy perspective, it's very much for us, like is this unique to us, or is it kind of industry standard? And like, leasing is leasing, especially if it's top of funnel. Like,
Right.
does it accept pets? Is it still available? Whatever that set of questions is. Doesn't matter if it's Evernest or someone else.
Yeah, there's one, as you were talking, one of the things that I think is real that people talk to me about a lot is like, all of a sudden you've got like, with your scale with 20,000 doors, you've got like probably a myriad of point solutions too, all of a sudden that the human has to bounce between too. You've got, you mentioned at least a few different vendors in the mix. You're building your own products. I think it's safe to assume that you will buy and then maybe build down the road as you start to see patterns of things that may be proprietary to you or a differentiation. But I think what suffers in all that right now is that we're in a point in this industry where like there's been this like massive explosion of point solutions that do one or two things really well. Some of those are becoming headless products where people like yourself can be like, okay, great, I'm just going to wrapper this in. My user doesn't have to even know what that is. It can just work in one interface. I feel like this is a pretty front and center problem when you have like, especially if you're trying to use AI and it's spread across so many different places and so many different services, outside of the fact that like cost controls go out of, kind of spiraling out of control for you where you can't really tell, like I've got that leasing problem. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, but I'm spending like a lot of money with a whole bunch of different services. Could I centralize this and get some benefits? I've seen this happening in multifamily a lot where there was this influx of like using 20,000 tools and then kind of trying to kind of centralize down to at least if I'm going to use those tools, my humans don't have to suffer through going through a lot of different places to access them or make sense of things. How do you feel about this pattern and where we are?
Yeah. So Evernest, to Matthew's credit, 4 years ago, I think they started building their own internal system. And so almost all of day-to-day property management workflows are run through our own proprietary software. And it is using third-party services, but in that headless manner. And so all of the data is on our systems. And crucially, and we have this conversation with a lot of vendors, and a lot of vendors fail to understand how important this is to us. All of the communication is over our rails. So even for a communication AI, they are the brain behind it, but the messaging is all going over our rails. So it's a single number that someone is seeing. It's a single email. We have full visibility into that flow. So that positions us well to go build AI solutions on top of it. Although there is still a fair amount of data work to put it in the right way to make it more easily accessible for an AI, as opposed to I just need to fetch it and display it on a screen. So that's some of the work that we're doing right now. But in terms of third-party solutions versus first-party solutions, I think it's always been important. It's only going to be more important to have full control of your data. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to plug in AI the way that you want to, or build your own on top. But if your core data is spread across 5 different systems, you're always going to be flying blind. Now, like maybe your AI can go over the top and log into 5 different things and navigate UIs, but that's just so wildly inferior and brittle and expensive and slow that you're going to be left behind. So I do think that the industry needs to move towards headless services. And I think they need to think really critically about who their customer is. And if I'm their customer, I'm going to have a much different set of needs and capabilities than if your prototypical 300 door customer is. And if it's your 300 door customer, like your delivery mechanism might be a connector, which is basically an MCP server, but I'm going to say connector because they're not going to understand MCP server. A connector that is enabled through, the Claude marketplace or a Codex marketplace, where you can just say, hey, go to connectors, search for my product, click enable, authenticate in, and like Claude is the way that they interact, or some desktop AI app is the way that they interact with your service. Because they're not going to build to the API the way I am, but they're going to want it in the place that they're doing all of their work.
So I guess the narrative to take away is that, yeah, it's a real problem if you're sprawling all your information over a lot of different places. Your key strategy is to centralize it, figure out, what products will play nice with it, and start to build. That's great advice. I also would love to hear, kind of in closing, what you said you gave some advice to yourself or wrote it down, like where you think things are going in the next few months. I do this all the time, and I'm seeing it happen way faster. Where do you think the rest of this year will play out in terms of AI strategy, specifically for our industry? What do you think is going to change between now and December?
I think that the technology capabilities are going to continue to accelerate. I think people, including myself, are going to continue to feel like we're not moving fast enough and we're being left behind. And this is what I said to the executive team in March. While this sounds like a technology problem, it is not a technology problem. It is a organizational change and business process management problem. Like, that's going to be the long pole. I don't think that's going to change in the next 8 months. So to go back to your question, which I didn't answer, which is what is going
These
to
are
change.
safe assumptions, by the way.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
aren't
No.
hot takes.
Yeah. No, I know. I think what is going to change is over the next 7 months, I think you're going to see some companies that have actually internalized and operationalized AI in a way that is transforming their business and transforming their P&Ls, as opposed to hype, prototypes, proofs of concept, single success stories.
Yeah, I always hate making these hot takes because you listen to them later and you're like, damn, that was so wrong. But I got one for you, and I'll put it out there. I don't know when this will actually air, but I think the concept of a second brain for the organization is going to probably be the biggest shift between now and December. I feel like a lot of what people have been focusing on is like the shiny agent capabilities and, oh my God, did you know you could do this? You can make a video with that, and you can do this with that. And that's all cool. But what I think is really shaping up for the real builders who are super nerds like me and maybe you is we're starting to realize that there's an excessive amount of waste that goes into using AI and people have experienced it now. You start asking it a question and it gets it perfect the first time, but the next 3 times it's completely off the rails wrong. And you start to burn tokens and you start to get frustrated. And I think what people are starting to discover is by building a second brain of knowledge, like we have in the industry, I think you've seen this enough now that people are like, oh, you need SOPs for everything. You got to document everything. But if you still go around and talk to property managers today, they're like, I haven't documented everything. But I do think that with the shift towards people who are super serious about enabling these AI strategies, they do. Like you were talking about the leasing one, you can't make a really great leasing AI unless you've documented your leasing perfectly. And I think in those old days, it was we're documenting it for humans. And I think the second brain concept is being able to, kind of thread that needle between documenting it for humans and for AI. So anyone who's gotten really geeky with prompt writing, you realize the way you write a prompt for an AI is so different than how I would talk to you. Yeah. Right. And I use Whisper, which is great for not using a keyboard. They have a new option 2 button that you say something and then it turns it into a prompt, and I read what it's saying and I'm like, whoa, I would never have said that. But it's when I use those prompts, AI is way better. So this new second brain concept, I think, is basically building this rich knowledge of everything that's happening in your business, the way that you would describe who your perfect customer is, the way you describe how you handle escalations in a way that works both for humans and AI. That's new. To me, that is going to be table stakes for acceleration with AI. Whereas before that, people are just like you said, they're they're driving some outcomes, but it's costing them a lot,
Yeah.
or it's a lot of brain damage. And poor Vikas, like he's the one that's figuring it out. Now all of a sudden it's all institutionalized and everyone can just tap into that brain when they use our AI or whatever tool they use. It's like, boom, it just knows.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think the mindset shift that people will start having is, in the past, when you write an SOP, it's like, am I just doing documentation for the sake of documentation? Because like, I'm going to write this SOP, and
Who's
then
going to read it?
who's going to read it? And then are they going to adhere to it? And so like, what am I actually doing here? And the nice thing about AI is if you write that SOP and then you deploy it properly, then it's going to use it. It's not going to be 100% because it's AI, but like you can put in a process change, and with a much higher level of fidelity than a team of people, you're going to get change. And so I think people are going to start to see that investment actually bears fruit. And so SOP writing is not going to be as terrible as it was before. And if you can get really good at getting AI to write it for you, then it becomes even less terrible.
And then maybe, just maybe, because we're starting to see some newer platforms like Hermes and whatnot that actually have real learning that's happening in them, maybe then that's where this second brain becomes like its own living, breathing thing, because AI is updating it and it's getting smarter and smarter. I think that's probably the biggest unlock that's coming. All these frontier tools that are like new versions of how AI agents are being built, they're so focused on this great learning loop, because there are really no good learning loops built into, like the main models like Claude and also with what OpenAI is doing. But these ones are eating up copious amount of information because they're sitting on computers and they can just do it quickly. The question will be, will the future of like the next 6 months of AI essentially build these second brains and learning loops that they're self-correcting and being more autonomous? That's my feeling as we're going there super quick. You saw basically Claude eat up OpenClaw's feature set super fast.
Yeah.
I think the next piece that's coming is this. And if I was a property manager listening to this, I would be going wild documenting things in preparation for that.
Yeah, I think it's two pieces. I think it's documentation, and then I think it's enabling that learning loop. And so whether that's built into the product or you have to hack it in yourself somehow, but making sure that you're capturing that feedback so that you can improve it and learn it. Otherwise, having the human in the loop is just, it's work that's not compounding. You need to get that feedback to compound.
Are you guys doing that manually right now? Like, are you, for lack of a real learning loop built into most AI tools right now, are you essentially having the human feed that information in?
I think we're a hybrid. So we don't have a real-time learning loop built into our products and our AI products today. But we do build the instrumentation and measurement so that when a human does a correction, that's captured in a structured, consistent way. And then we batch job the learning on some cadence.
Yeah, that's how we do it too. It's frustrating because it feels like it should be so much better than that. And that's where I think it's probably going to change soon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been super awesome. Any last pieces of advice for anyone listening in terms of things they should be thinking about for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think there's some period of time where the faster you adopt AI and you translate that into financial improvement, whether it's margin or LTV, like there's going to be excess returns to be had. And then at some point, those excess returns are going to go away because people will have competed all of them away. And so where you definitely don't want to be is in a position where you can't compete when those things go away, because then you're going to go out of business. Where you would like to be, and where we would like to be and are going to be, is taking advantage of that period where you're ahead of the curve and you can garner excess returns in some way, whether that's through a better P&L or through being able to acquire more customers through pricing or service or LTV. If you are first to do this and to do this well, there's a lot of benefits to be had. And so I remember I was talking to someone about a year ago. I think they've shifted their opinion, but a year ago, he was saying, I hear all this stuff about AI, but I don't know anyone who's using AI that well, and the products all seem pretty early. I'm just going to wait for it to get figured out and then I'll deploy it. I don't think you can do that.
He's probably not in business anymore. So,
well, he's like a full stack vertically integrated real estate business. So there's a lot of opportunity there, regardless of what you're doing.
yes.
But yeah, you can't wait. What I tell everyone is it's okay to feel behind because everyone feels behind. And the only way to figure this out is to start wrestling with it. You can't wait for it to come to you.
It's great feedback, man. Thank you so much for joining the show, and we'll see you out on the circuit.
Thank you.